You talk about solutions for the Palestinian people. The
Yeah.
Palestinian people are arguably the most pampered people by international aid organizations in the
Are you
history of the
kidding
world.
me?
No, I'm
Even
not.
before this war, 78% of people in Gaza said they had, not enough food to eat.
Right. And why is that? Why are you blaming
Well,
Israel
in
for that?
part, it's Hamas, and in part, it's the fact that Israel imposed a blockade and talked about putting them on a diet.
If your neighbor
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Left Reckoning 149. We can't beat climate change without workers. Hope you are doing well wherever you are at. My name is David Griscom, and I'm broadcasting to y'all live from the great state of Texas. Matt Leck is headed out early for vacation, but don't y'all worry. We still got a full show for y'all tonight. In just a little bit, we are going to be joined by Nicole, who is a PhD student at Syracuse University, to talk about her research and work on climate change, doing something that people don't do enough of, actually going out there and talking to working people. Her work very much focuses on Germany, but I think a lot of the lessons there are very applicable to people all across the globe. So really looking forward to sharing that conversation with y'all. And then in the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning to get access. Because of the wonders of technology, I will be joined by my co-host Matt Leck to be doing a quick rundown of something that Christopher Hitchens never wavered on, despite many of his other heel turns, and that is human rights and human dignity for the people of Palestine. So you won't want to miss that. Patreon.com/left reckoning to get access to that immediately after the main show. And just a couple quick notes. We are going to be going on a little bit of a Christmas vacation. So no Sunday show this week. Next Tuesday, though, we have our big Left Reckoning end of the year, Bumsteer of the Year award show. That will be up at the normal time, 6 p.m. Central, where Matt and I are going to be talking about some of the worst folks of the year. You won't want to miss that. And then after that, we should be back on regularly scheduled programming. Now, I don't want to front load too much before we get into this conversation here. But as it is the holidays and the end of the year, it's a little bit of a time of reflection. And I just sort of wanted to lay something out. There are tremendous evils and difficult situations that we're sort of up against. And there is a whole host of folks out there who want you to blame these problems on conspiracy or on your neighbor, on your friends, right? We're seeing a whole repeat of that coming up. We'll be talking about that certainly a lot next week. A lot of the old school kind of Hillary Clinton 2016, 2020 folks out there where, liberals trying to browbeat people into supporting the Democratic Party. And a lot of that is all about making excuses for some of the most powerful people in the world. Then you have folks like RFK, who is, if you saw there in that clip, by the way, Crystal Ball did a great job at sort of eviscerating that character, who instead of wanting to talk about the real issues when it comes to climate, when it comes to global war, and when it comes to inequality in this country, instead of talking about capitalism, the economic system that we're under, it's all of this kind of conspiratorial talk, right? Where there is basically a secret cabal out there that needs to be beaten down. And luckily, somebody like RFK is the one who sees the light. Now, as you can see, time and time again, this guy puts his foot in his mouth when he really starts trying to talk about solutions. Remember, climate change, this guy who's supposed to be, since he has a history as an environmental lawyer, is supposed to be somebody who is going to be able to speak well to that issue. This is a guy who says, just like Joe Biden, I'm a capitalist. I think markets should work, and we should just find ways to make markets work better. That's a disaster for the planet, and it's a disaster for working people. So where are we at then? I think that right now, what we're seeing, all the kind of difficulties that we're sort of trying to find our way out of, especially when we don't have, let's call it like a candidate or a presidential candidate, or even many elected officials to sort of rally behind. There's a kind of meanness that gets cultivated in that moment, right? Because it can feel a little hopeless or difficult. And there's a kind of pessimism that comes from that kind of feeling of hopelessness. And I think that if anything, looking back at 2023, we should sort of take from this previous year is that help is not going to come from up on high. So it's more critical than ever that people who are on the left, socialists, let's talk real here, um, really get involved and engaged in the labor struggle. Because that is the one silver lining, not only in the fight for higher wages and for more dignity of people at work, but also in the fight for the international struggle, right? We should not take lightly how significant it is that we're seeing the UAW, after winning this massive strike, going out and saying that they support peace and justice in Palestine and they're calling for a ceasefire. And there's a weird kind of culture sometimes you see on the left where people like to dress themselves up and present themselves in certain kind of colors. But when it comes to actually listening and talking to and building movements with working people, they get a little weird. They get a little strange. There's some of it which is aloofness, right? Of the fact that unfortunately, a large cohort of people on the left might come from kind of certain cultural backgrounds that aren't very tied to the working class. We're talking the more middle class credential types. But there's also a kind of conspiratorial and hipster love of being on the outside. And at a certain point, if you really want to see this country change, if you really want to see a stronger working class movement, you got to get more comfortable with being in the mainstream. And that's something that on Left Reckoning, we really try to sort of hone and build is a capacity to never mute our message, to never change what it is that we are saying, but to not do it in a way that is confusing or off-putting, intimidating, etc., to everyday folks. And there's some leftists who actually prefer to communicate in a way that is inaccessible and unwelcoming. There's an even worse and perverse version of this of people who consider themselves leftists, but deep down, a lot of their feelings are an animosity of the crowd, of the many, right? You see this in really depressing political movements like degrowth, right? Where you see a lot of these characters on Twitter, spending most of their time not doing very much productive, and in fact, spending a lot of time attacking working class people. Americans, they love their hamburgers too much, blah blah blah. Right? This kind of antisocial, anti-comradely discourse that we get, unfortunately. I don't want to start the show too much on a negative note, because I do see things really moving in a positive direction, and I think people are recognizing some of the pitfalls that we go that the left has fallen into. But more than anything, I think that one of the big lessons that we should be taking from the Bernie Sanders moment, and we know where that got us, right? We know the limitations of that strategy, and we also know what avenues it opened up. We can't ever turn our backs on mass politics, and mass politics needs to be the calling card of any kind of real socialist movement. You look and mass politics can be something as simple as thinking about ways to organize and mobilize your community for a more equitable future, right? Think about something. Mass politics is organizations like the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which I just had a piece out on Jackman about, right? These people were organizing where they were at. They were organizing workers and sharecroppers and tenant farmers in the Jim Crow South, black and whites, to get higher wages, to get better protections, to fight against the KKK, to get what they needed from the federal government. That's mass politics, right? This kind of insular, in crowd, hipster stuff, it's not mass politics. And unfortunately, that really dominated the American left from like the 70s onward. And something shifted and opened up, and it didn't get us everything that we wanted, didn't get us everything that we needed. But it certainly started to show us a roadmap that if leftists and socialists start taking their politics and their demands and their goals of liberation more seriously, that means that people have to get much more serious about being rooted and grounded in everyday working class politics. And the environmental movement is one of those things where this should be something that is a mass politics movement, right? We all want to live on a safer, greener planet, healthier planet. Well, to do that, you're going to need a movement. And you're not going to be able to build a movement if a lot of the introductory aspects of your politics are, talking bad about everyday working people, saying things like you guys need to live worse lives than you're living right now. Remember, this is a country where significant people not only are poor, but where a significant amount of American families struggle to put food on the table week on, week out. And to sit here and say, hey, you know what? You've been living too high on the hog. It's time to sort of wrap that shit up. Not really a message that I think is going to win you a lot of friends and allies. And it certainly is not going to give you the capacity to do the things that we want to do. The things that we have to do in this country and in the globe is radically expand green and renewable technologies. So things like solar and wind and things like nuclear power, so that we can provide electricity for the masses. There's an aspect to this that should and could be a mass popular program for jobs, for higher wages, for lower energy costs, for higher standards of living for people. And that's the way that it's going to have to be if we want to win. Unfortunately, I think with a lot of people sort of suffering and struggling with the losses that we've seen from Bernie Sanders to Jeremy Corbyn to, let's call it, the left populist movement over the 2010s and into the early 2020s, a lot of people are returning to that old outside crowd playbook, right? Not very interested in mass politics, just sort of interested in being right and looking down. I'm not really here for it. I don't really think that that's going to get us where we need to go. So, if anything, going into 2024, I think we should build off of the strengths that we saw in this year. And what are those strengths? Getting working people and everyday folks united into a common political and economic project. And we saw a lot of really heartening examples of that over the year, despite all of the difficulties and all of the evil that was encountered. It's not enough. We're not where we need to be, but that certainly is the roadmap for where we want to go. And going into this next year, I hope that on a kind of, large scale political level, we go into this year really committed to this goal of building mass politics in the US left and on the international level. And on an interpersonal level, doing a little bit of work to ask yourself, are my kind of political engagements with everyday folks things that are positive, things that are helping build the movement, things that are helping us think better, get stronger, and grow? Or am I trying to present myself as somebody who sort of gets it and the other people don't? Am I somebody who is engaging in conversations in good faith with the hope of, instructing and most importantly, learning from other people? This is something we're going to get into with a conversation with Nicole. She talked to folks who are working in the coal industry to understand what coal miners in Germany are thinking about transitions to green and renewable energy. Some of the stuff you might expect, some of it you won't. But you're never going to get that if you're not willing to have conversations in an open way with people. And the right loves, if instead of doing class politics in America, the left spends a lot of time doing kind of culture war politics, because those are weird lines, right? People sometimes are going to take sides on there that are not always in line with a certain economic interest or that economic interest. You can divide people on a whole spectrum of things in society. But the hope and the promise of socialist and working class politics is that there is the ability to construct a majority, and that is the working class majority. And it's something that I think hopefully we're seeing some germination around today with the labor movement. It's something that we've seen in the past, again, with the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, where you had black and white workers coming together, taking on the Jim Crow South, taking on the plantation class, and taking on the FDR administration when it wasn't working for them. They didn't do that, by the way, because there's also another group of silly folks out there who think that organizing around class lines means ignoring issues of race and gender and sexuality. No, that's not the answer. What's so inspiring about examples like the UAW, like the STFU, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, is that they organize around these things, not at the exclusion of anything else. And in fact, by organizing in this kind of large base mass politics orientation, they are a lot stronger and more capable of fighting back against racism, sexism, and all of these other kind of bigotries. So it's never a question of one and not the other. But it's always a question of how can we build mass movements so that we can unite people. So in all of these struggles, in all of these fights that people are up against, we can take on the forces of wickedness. We can take on the forces of capital. We can take on the forces of pessimism with a united and strong front of working class folks. Anyway, feeling a little up and down today. So I think on that, I'm going to jump us over to our conversation with Nicole. Don't forget, we are going to be going to the post game immediately after this, folks, to talk a little bit about Christopher Hitchens, hang out with Mr. Matt Leck. I hope you guys join us there, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We'll see you in just a minute or two. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, broadcasting to y'all live from Austin, Texas. I am joined by Nicole Kleinheisterkamp González, who is a PhD student at Syracuse University. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today on Left Reckoning. And I was just wondering, I mean, we got a lot of stuff we want to talk to folks about. But if you just wanted to sort of introduce yourself to the audience, what your research is about generally.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is the first time that I'm talking about my research like to a broader audience, and that's good because normally it's just between academics, and that's probably a little bit different. But yes, so I'm a PhD student in geography in Syracuse University. I think I'm in my 5th year now. I'm not counting anymore. But so I did a year of field work in Germany. I'm half German, so that's kind of like why I also chose Germany. I know Germany well. I've lived here for some years in the past, and I was always interested in like what I call the labor environment nexus. So what is happening on the labor side of things in terms of climate change, not only like the direct effects of climate change on labor, but also like mitigation strategies and what that means for labor. Because obviously, if we're going to decarbonize, we're going to change a lot of stuff in industries, right? Ideally. So that will have repercussions on people's lives and labor. And so I was interested in Germany specifically because, well, probably most know that Germany is kind of going through this like green transition process, which they call here Energiewende. And that has, it always appears as though Germany is like very ambitious in their climate goals and stuff. So that got me like interested. And then looking at the unions in Germany are quite strong in comparison to the US, for example. Also because of, laws, that allow for a certain representation in the workplace, in especially big companies. And in industries, it's very, they're very well organized, and that's like the stronghold of unions. That obviously, like everywhere else, like service unions are a little bit less organized here as well. And then I was looking, I thought, okay, let's look at the sectors that are going to be probably most affected by the mitigation strategies that the governments are taking. So I chose the automobile industry in Germany, and then coal workers as well. And the automobile industry, obviously, we have many brands here. Or OEMs, what we call original equipment manufacturers, what we call them. And so I decided on Volkswagen. And so I spent like a year in 2 places. First, in an automobile plant in a town called Baunatal, which is like in the middle of the country, and then which is like the biggest components parts of Volkswagen in Germany, and I think like the second biggest in the world or something like that. It's a huge plant, and they don't build cars; they build components, and then the components are sent somewhere else to like actually build the car. And then I spent another like 5 or 6 months in the coal mining industry in the west and like in the middle of the country in the west. Germany has 3 coal mining sites, like in the middle of Germany from west to east. And I was looking at the west side, and especially because in 2019 the government made an agreement with coal miners basically that they're going to phase out in 2038, like entirely phase out. But that change for the region that I was looking at, they're gonna phase out in 2030. So they moved it 8 years earlier, and that obviously means a lot of stuff for the people in the region. So yeah, I spent my time there interviewing mostly. Wait, I'm gonna change the light because it's on my face. I'm interviewing mostly workers in both sides, but also works councils, which I can maybe explain later what it is in Germany, and union people who are, directly linked to the plants and fields.
Mhm. Well, I mean, and it's really great having you on to talk about this because, you're doing something that sometimes not just in academic work, but just in the left in general, it's unfortunately a little rare these days. It's going out and talking to working people about what they think about things. And I wanted to dive into some of what you've gained from your research in just a second. But maybe to just sort of set us up. I mean, very clearly, when it comes to dealing with climate change, we're at a crossroads, right? I mean, at this point, it's almost like a cliche to say something like that. The situation is dire. There's a feeling that there needs to be action. And one of the questions is how and what form that's going to take. One thing that has become fairly popular within some cohorts in the U.S., and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I also find to be growing in popularity with some cohorts in Europe, is this kind of mentality. And part of it is the degrowthers, but I think even people outside of the degrowth movement on the environmental left, there's this feeling that basically workers, particularly workers in like heavy industry or in extraction, are sort of sitting high on the hog, right? They're living too well, and basically, what the global north is going to have to do is to lower the standards of living for everybody, but particularly for workers. And I'm just curious, and the idea here is that will benefit the global south in some way or another.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to maybe set us up here, what you think about that perspective and that line of argument.
I think that degrowth in general, like if we're talking about political strategies, is not very wise strategy, or like maybe even slogan for a strategy, specifically and especially like in industrialized countries, because obviously if you talk to people, if you tell people that you're gonna have to like have less, which is basically kind of the message at least that people get, it's not gonna become very popular. And it also comes from like a stand of like moral understanding of what our duty as global northerners is in relation to all the others. And I think that's something that will not resonate with people. And I do think that if we ever manage to get to a social society, there are sectors in the current industries that will have to maybe not grow, but like completely not exist anymore, because there's stuff that we just don't, needs are produced in capitalist societies and for profits. So obviously that has an effect on what kind of things we're buying and what kind of things we have in the world. And some things are just basically made for people to buy. And I think there it's fine to talk about, but that's also like, okay, if we talk about it, we'll have to talk about it when the moment is right, and when we've reached the point, and when we've democratically kind of like decided on what we don't want to have in our society because we don't need it, and it's using resources that could be used for something else. That's the only thing that I don't know if maybe if that would be like an agreement with the growthers. I don't know. Maybe it's also not even that, but in general, as a political strategy, I think it's not useful unless you think that the only way to get like significant climate mitigation strategies is to like I don't know, appeal to like a well-educated part of society that will make that decision because of a moral standpoint. But if you really want to like create pressure, and when we know in capitalism we need to create mass pressure in order to achieve anything, you will need more than just a stratum of society to get your ideas forward. And in general, I think if you want to bring forward climate mitigation, you need to, which is also something that the workers that I talked to a lot told me, you need to like kind of like convince people to be in favor of that, and that means to kind of like link it to their material needs. And even if we're talking about like industrial societies, there is still class. It's not like, you know, there, and even for these workers specifically, maybe okay, they have, you know, high wages, but still there is still a thing that's like missing in their I would say in their lives. For example, time is a very big issue for these workers, right? Because they sacrifice a lot of their time, especially automobile workers in the plants, and instead of being with family. So there are things that you can like appeal to these people and link that to like a overall climate strategy, but to make it more, instead of making it only about a climate, making it about like, you know, we want to make people's lives better. That's kind of like the way I see it. That would be more strategically more intelligent for the climate movement. Yeah.
100%. And you know, we could do more on this, but you know, people can also watch our conversations with Matt Huber we've had on this program a lot. You know, I think one thing that's also really notable, and the kind of criticism we get on this program for our coverage and debates around degrowth is, people oftentimes respond and be like, well, what do you think about this industry or that industry or this kind of, you know, manufacturing technique? Is like 100%. I think that at least the people we're bringing on this program are all people who think that we need fundamental shifts in the way that we produce and even in the ways that we consume. But there's two assumptions that I think go on with, you know, some of these degrowthers. Is one, that consumption in the global north can just sort of be turned off and then it will be replaced in the global south, and that's not really true, because in the global south, what you need massive campaigns of industrialization to allow people to have electricity and all the things. So, you know, this is not a take one away and then another one pops up, right? You actually have to have the resources and the capabilities to do those kind of things. And that's going to mean growth, and that's going to mean technology sharing and all that kind of stuff. And then the second, I think, is the one that a lot of people focus on rightly, is that politically, it can be, you know, really, you know, dangerous. When, I mean, I've heard, I believe, Andre's mom saying something along the lines is like, what we need is like war communism for the climate. And like totally, like we need grand action and things like that. But remember, war communism, the goal was to build like communism, was like a better future. Like we're going to sacrifice temporarily so that we can live a better life. And what you're basically getting is a kind of permanent state of sacrifice, which I don't find to be very politically appealing, or even personally appealing. I will just put my cards on the table too.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think Matt, who's my advisor, by the way, is right in that sense, right? If we're talking about global south, well, we want growth. We want them to have the populations that don't have electricity they need. It's like should be like a human right, to have electricity and other stuff that we have in the north as well. Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I agree in that sense.
Well, I mean, maybe to start diving into your work, you know, and again, I will just say, like, very much, you know, appreciate having you on, and also, as I noted before, doing something that's unfortunately rare is going out and talking to folks. Maybe before we talk about some of the more detailed stuff, I wanted to sort of talk about like what the conception of climate change is within a lot of these communities that you were speaking with, because I will just say, like, stateside, Matt Huber you know, has done some really great work on this. In the U.S., there's this term called frontline communities, right? And those are the people who are the ones who are going to get hit the hardest with climate change. And you know, and it's, you know, it's good to note all these kind of things, but when you go and you talk to people in those communities, people say, do you think climate change is real? A lot of people say yes. Do you think it's going to affect you? No. And I'm just curious, in your research, what that experience is like in Germany, when you were talking to folks.
So I will only talk about the people that I interviewed, which is like the automobile workers and the coal miners. I think there is a little bit of difference between both. Especially also, I think the union has an influence on that, in that sense, because the union for the automobile workers they are called the IG Metall. IG is IG, and it means Industrial Union. G is for Gewerkschaft, that's the German word. And they are a more leftist social democrat union. And the other union for the coal miners is the IGBCE, which they're unions for miners in general and for chemical workers in the chemistry industry. And they are a bit of more conservative union, also politically. So you will have workers in there that, you know, can vote in a very broad spectrum between the CDU, which is like the center, like the Merkel party in when Merkel was chancellor, and maybe even like they will vote for the liberals, and very few would vote for like the social democrats. That would be already like very leftist for them. So that, I think, has an influence on how they think about climate change as well. In the auto workers, I would say I did have young workers that were like, yes, this is an important issue, and we are, you know, I'm worried about it. There was also, interestingly, I think in both sides, mostly on the auto workers, also like the sense of like, which I think is also due to the, you know, overall consensus in society that with your individual consumption, you will have some sort of effect on climate change. So there was this feeling of many of these workers like, well, yeah, I work, you know, I drive a car a lot, or something like that. And they would have like bad conscience about that. So that would be kind of like the way that they would express it. I had also a couple or several who would deny climate change in a way. And I think when you deny climate change, there's like a big spectrum of denialism of what it means. Some are like totally like, this is made up, it doesn't exist. And then others are like, well, it exists, but it's not human made. Like maybe humans are helping it make it worse, but it's not actually. So it's like different types. And you would have mostly the type of like, I don't think it's human made. And it was very often also in the coal miners linked to like a sense of Germany is being made responsible, or like a very big responsibility within climate change, and us as auto workers or as coal miners, we're also specifically made responsible for like contributing to climate change. And I think that kind of like feeling from these workers have created like a rejection to climate change, and it has developed into in a form of climate denial. And it was very strong in the coal miners. Like I would say, I would say, I don't know how many, I talked to like between 30 and 40 people, and all of them, I don't remember a single one who was not climate denier, so to speak. And that was very interesting, because at first I was like surprised. I was like, wow, this is like really straightforward. Like, I don't think it's, you know, it exists. It's human. It's not human made, blah, blah, blah. And then I got used to it because it was always the same answer. And I found that it was very often linked to not climate change in itself, but as a political project, a rejection to it as a political project. And I associated that also with, because often the workers would claim that they had very bad, how do you say, experiences with the climate activists. Because obviously the coal miners in Germany, they have much more like direct clashes with climate activists than automobile workers, because automobile workers, they might have protests outside of the plant, but it's not in the plant and they're like working, you know. But the coal miners, the activists would go into the mines and would make sit-ins and all of this. I don't know if you've seen it maybe on TV, like there's this group, and the Gelände, who are very known for doing this. Like every year they go to the coal mine and then they take it and they close it. And also other groups, and also like them defending little towns that are around the mines that were supposed to be destroyed to expand the mine. So, and these workers would often say like, we had really bad experiences with them. Like they would throw stones at us. They would tell us like that we're assholes, or like they would tell us like, how are you not ashamed to work for this company? And they are like, it's like a total like misunderstanding from the climate activists what the relationship of these workers with the company is, because it is a very like, you know, a very good employer for them, right? They earn a lot of money, they have many rights. In Germany, the steel and the miners union workers have a very specific form of co-determination rights that are higher than in other industries. They have like people sitting in the board of directors and board of like the board of the company. So they have like representatives in all of these stages. So that makes obviously for them like kind of like a very close-knit relationship to the company, and obviously an interest at the end, which is, you know, part of like this contradictions within capitalism, that they have an interest in that their company does well. And so that was kind of like, in terms of climate change, what I saw in the field, I was very surprised with the coal miners. But at the end, like even when you talk to them a little bit more, it was not that they didn't give a fuck about environment, right? They were so I don't care about that. Was never the case. It was always like in relation to some sort of political issue or climate activists. And in terms of political issue, obviously, because the way the government has been dealing with climate mitigation is by putting the costs on working people, on the population. And also Germany has this issue with like not wanting to go into debt. So everything is like cut, huge austerity measures. And they are also hand in hand with climate measures. So obviously that's not going to be very appealing to the workers. Yeah.
So, and just so we have it right, the coal that we're talking about here, this is coal that's being used to produce power, right? This isn't for okay.
Yes, it's coal. In Germany, we had two types of coal. The one I'm looking at is I forget the name, lignite. And the other one, that's the one that's underground, that's the anthracite or bituminous coal. That doesn't exist anymore in Germany. It used to exist. It was a huge industry. Like they had like 1,600,000 workers back in the 50s or something. And it gradually disappeared.
So, you know, on this, I mean, when you were talking particularly to the coal miners there, what was the sense of the lifespan of the kind of work that they were doing? You know, was it something that people felt might be threatened, that they might not be able to maintain their jobs and would sort of be, you know, thrown out effectively? Or is there a sense of like, oh, you know, these things are, you know, as you were noting before, there are like attempts to start shutting these things down. I mean, what was their kind of, you know, 10, 15-year vision of the future like?
So I think in terms of like, if we're talking about like, we use this very broad concept of just transition, and we narrow it to, which is often what's narrowed to when it's related to labor, to like, to, you know, either compensation or qualification for new jobs, or being like educate, like having, you know, all these things.
Yeah, you can go to a community college here. That's what they sort of say, right?
Okay,
you know?
So in terms of that, if you take that, you would say there is like for coal miners and maybe also in a sense for automobile, although that I see it a little bit less reliable. You could say they negotiated a just transition for the workers, because the at least in the coal miners, they will be allowed to go into early pension. I wrote it down. That starts with, because it's in both automobiles also have that, but they have it a little bit different. Let me see so I don't say anything that's wrong. Yeah, so the early pension for like the coal miners, it starts at 58, and they get like 80% of their salary until they reach the age of like the actual pension, and then they go into full pension, into their actual pension. So that's for the older miners. So when if you reach 58 at the year that they're going to close the plant, which in my case was 2030, then they would be allowed to get that. You can also get that now, because it kind of works like the company has to see if they need enough, if they have enough workers, or if they don't need them anymore. So they could, like, you know, you have to apply it and maybe they will accept it. And the issue is for younger workers. So, so the issue is for younger workers that haven't reached that age. And if in 2030, let's say they're 40 or 45, they will be like too old, right, to get into the job market, like to look for a new job completely. So they also negotiated for them like a year of like transfer to look for jobs, or if they wanna, if the workers say I'm gonna just go by myself, look for a job earlier, they get a compensation from the company. In the for the automobile workers, it's similar. They get they can go into early pension, the older workers. So the way that these unions are kind of like looking at this transition and shedding the jobs is that the demographics in Germany is like we have a very old population, and these people were going to pension, and then the youngers will just, you know, maybe be transferred to a new job, but it will happen in a way that no one will be fired, so to speak, right? And for the coal miners, they, and the automobile workers too, they were very confident that that would be the case, that they wouldn't lose their jobs. So there is no fear of I'm going to lose my job. But there is a big fear, which is interesting for me as it was, is that the non-existence of these jobs in the future, because they're not going to, no new people are going to come in, they're just not going to exist anymore, means that the regions are going to be impoverished, and that there's going to be a process of deindustrialization. And that's something that they all are aware of, and that they all are like, we are not in agreement with this. We want industrial jobs in Germany. And yeah, so that's kind of
well. So I mean, you know, on that, I mean, you know, this is something that's, you know, typical, you know, across the globe, and certainly in the U.S., right? You know, where there are certain kind of like regional industries, and, you know, and certain ones in extraction, things like that, could be higher paid for people with maybe less education, or things like that. I mean, the oil industry in Texas like does a really good PR job of sort of presenting itself as like the ticket out of, you know, being a poor working class person, maybe into middle class or something like that. Yeah. It's a little bit hit or miss in actuality. It's a pretty brutal industry, not a lot of unionization, but I was, you know, I'm curious, you know, I think that that's a really important thing to actually highlight, is like there's people's fear of like losing their communities, and then what kind of jobs will those people be going into, and what the sense of, you know, the quote unquote green jobs, what the sense of that is like for workers in Germany, or even just the reality. I'll just say, you know, for comparison's sake, here in Texas, we're having a huge wind and solar boom. But, you know, a lot of people who work in energy industries sort of know that the kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be this way, by the way, y'all. I'm not saying that this is what it necessarily is, but a lot of people know that a lot of these wind and solar jobs don't really pay as much as like more fossil fuel heavy extraction or production jobs do. And, you know, that's an issue. But I'm just curious in Germany if it's this kind of similar dynamic.
So I read some months ago that I forgot the company for these wind farms. Forgot the company, but so the union, which is the same union as the ones for the automobile industry, the ones that are organizing these workers, they had to strike like 120 days or something to get like a contract. So it was a huge thing, and they got Vestas. That's the name of the company. So and they were able to get a contract, like a bargaining for all the workers. But yes, when I asked the coal workers about that, they were also very aware that in terms of amounts of jobs, they're not going to compensate the amounts of jobs. Also because you need for like wind farms or solar, you basically need people who are mobile first, and who are like just going there when it has an issue, right? So they just fix it and then they leave. And so it doesn't need like day-to-day, normally it doesn't need day-to-day people in there. So they were aware of that, and they said that's the problem, because it's not going to compensate the amount of jobs that we're going to lose in industries. But what was surprising to me was that they were all, which is also like, right, there's this sense of like, especially coal workers, that they're very conservative and that they're going to be against all these renewables. But they all were like, well, you know, if the conditions are good, if the working conditions are good, I have to work in a wind farm, and like, I don't care. And one of the young guys even told me like, yeah, I would even go to the like, you know, like the sea wind farms in the ocean. Yeah, because it's very good. You could just work 2 weeks and then you come back and you have 2 weeks free, and it's, yeah, I would do that. Like they were open to that, right? Which is kind of like, maybe people wouldn't think that they, you know, that they were like, as I said, right? It's not even like this climate denialism doesn't translate into them being like, I hate, I'm against all of this. But the important thing for them was the working conditions. So that's, yeah, that in the, so I haven't done research on how the conditions are in the solar industry on wind farms here in Germany. What I do know is that the company that for the coal that hires the coal miners that I was looking at, it's RWE. They are also building solar and wind farms. So many of the workers who are gonna hope, well, that's what they hoped also, that the young ones, that once the coal mines closes, that they will move to this renewable section of the company, and that they will work for the same company. But what I fear, but I wasn't able to to figure it out because the works councils are a little bit difficult to like get the information out of them, is if the conditions are the same as for the, if they're good enough as they are as in coal mining. Yeah.
So in a minute, I sort of want to get to, pulling out some of the larger lessons from this sort of politically and strategically, but I wanted to make sure that we're not ignoring the automobile workers.
Yes.
And I'm curious about what the sense around like things like electric vehicles are with those workers. I mean, again, just comparison's sake, in the U.S. this has become an issue because a lot of the big manufacturers are trying to use, and I think Germany probably has better laws than America does on this kind of thing. But a lot of the companies are saying, oh, well, actually, like an EV engine is not a combustion engine, so it's actually not under the same contract. And that was one of the things that the UAW had to. So no, they're saying if it's not if in the U.S. Some of the car companies are saying that like an engine for an electric vehicle is not the same thing as a combustion gasoline powered engine. So we're not going to allow that to be covered by the contract with the union, and we can hire non-union people. I was saying I bet it's probably a little bit different in Germany, but I'm curious about what people's were saying about EVs and that kind of transition within that industry.
So that's an interesting plant because the works councils, which I'm gonna very quickly explain.
Yes, please.
The works councils is like a structure that exists. There is a law that allows for the creation of works councils, which is basically people who are elected from the workers in a company. They can, if I'm not mistaken, if you have a company that is bigger like than 10 workers or something, you're allowed to vote for this person, and these people are in charge, like they are like the middleman between the workers and the bosses basically. So they are like the ones who if there are issues within the plant, they will like kind of resolve it. The union is the one that is in charge of bargaining the contracts, and normally the works councils are union members, but it can also happen that they're not. They don't have to be. So that's a little bit about the works council. So I forgot where I was going with that. So the interesting thing about the plan is that the works council at the time in 2006, there's a very strong co-determination factor in Volkswagen specifically, more than other OEMs in Germany. And these works councils back at the time, they thought we need to apply for electric vehicle parts because this is going to be the future. So they pressured basically management of the plant because all the plants in Volkswagen, they have to apply for the parts, and basically they are in in competition with each other as well. So not only with the international market, but also within Volkswagen, the plants in themselves are in competition. So they applied for electric vehicle parts and they got them. So they have been producing them since 2006. And it's getting bigger and bigger in the plant, obviously. That means they're going to lose jobs like 5,000, 6,000 in the next 10 years or something like that. And the workers were, on the one hand, like the ones that worked at the gas, like at the engine parts, it's a very rough. I looked at that too. It's very rough. It's very dirty. A lot of oil, a lot of dust and stuff in the air. It's like a really hard, bodily work. Whereas the EV is more like technological and automated, and it's like cleaner. So they were saying oh, I prefer that in that sense because I don't have to work with my body as much and it's cleaner. But what they very often had as a criticism, they said like EV is just like, you know, it's just a business for Volkswagen. It really doesn't have much to do with climate. And they were very like critical of the production of batteries in the global south. They were like very like, you know, how is this is not green if you're like, you know, extracting in mines and the working conditions in the south are so bad. And so they were like very critical of like the footprint, so to speak, the environmental footprint of batteries and EVs in general. So that was kind of like their which I thought was very interesting, that they were so concerned about like the supply chain, right, of the cars, even though they only produce little parts. Yeah.
Well, no, that is actually really, really fascinating. Well, I mean, in the last few minutes, I mean, we've sort of outlined, you know, I think some of, well, actually, before we get into some of the solutions too, I mean, you don't have to give us a holistic take here. But in the US, I mean, climate change has, you know, unfortunately become a bit of a culture war issue, right? Certain kinds of people believe in it or, you know, support action on it. Certain people deny it, you know, and sometimes I think, in the ways that you're talking about, I think those are people who are more directly affected by it, but I even just mean in the general public, right? And I'm curious, you know, what the status of that is like in Germany politically. You know, I mean, has it sort of been mediated into kind of a culture war fight between, you know, like the young, hip folks and then the older, more conservative people, or is Germany a little bit different from the States in that?
I think also in a sense, especially because the climate movement, which was also a thing like that many of the automobile workers mentioned, that like, you know, these kids have never worked in their life, they've never had like a real job, and they're like their daddy and their mommy drives them to school and stuff like that. So they have this like this idea of them being like middle class or rich kids who have time and are protesting this. So and they're not really looking at the real problems in the world, kind of, in a sense. But as I said, there's still like a sense of like in these two groups, there is an interest in of maintaining a good environment to live in, right? Even what I thought was interesting in coal miners was that they saw their labor specifically as like restoring the environment, because once you close the plant, the coal mine, sorry, you still need like three to 5 years to recultivate it, what they call it. And it's the same workers that recultivate it. So these workers have been like, kind of, you could say, destroying the earth, but at the same time recultivating it. So they would always say like, I don't understand how my job is considered to be, you know, related to destruction if at the end we're restoring the area. And they would often say like, oh, in this area that used to be the mine, now it's recultivated, and now the biodiversity is much higher than it used to be before and stuff. So there is like this, you know, as I said, it's not that they don't care about the environment at the end of the day. But yeah, I think it has, and as I said also, or maybe I didn't say it, but like the climate movement has not been able to make this about like bettering the material lives of people, or at least they have not been able to portray themselves as that. And so people don't see that, they just see it as like an abstract issue and not something that could relate to their lives or could make their lives better. And there are many things that even maybe in the US, people have this idea of Germany as like a, you know, social democratic country or whatever, with a strong welfare state, which we do have a welfare state, but it's been, you know, in the last decades and years, it has been cutting and cutting and cutting, and people are aware of this. These two groups of workers, they are aware that there needs to be more investment in education and in healthcare. That's something they often mentioned, and they know that these people don't earn enough money as well. For example, they say they need to get higher wages as well. So there are issues that you could connect to climate change, but that the actor that should be doing it or creating these bridges, sadly, is not being effective.
Yeah, I mean, you know, on that, like in the last couple of minutes, let's maybe take it to track, right? We're a little pressed for time here, but we can jump into both of these. First of all, let's maybe start kind of politics policy wise, based on your research and what you've come across in Germany, or even more holistically, if you'd like to. What would be a better response from the government? And then the follow up question I'm going to ask after that is like, maybe what are some lessons for the environmental movement? But first up, I mean, policy wise, how can we think of better ways to incorporate working people, particularly people heavily involved in these kind of industries, in a climate future, both in the sense of like getting support, but also hopefully improving their lives.
Yeah. So in the case of Germany, you would need, I think, first and foremost, you would need to eliminate from the constitution what we call the Schuldenbremse, which is the debt, like the debt break. Like Germany is always, the governments are very proud that we are allowed to go like 0.35 in debt from our GDP every year, something like that. So they are very proud of that, which obviously means, and all the unions are aware of that. This is like completely, and they have been saying like, you need to fucking invest, because like the industries are gonna go somewhere. They're gonna go to the US if we don't invest, and if we don't bring money into this transition. So that's like, I think, one of the very important things. And I think that's something that could create, like, I would think that industrial unions and all the other unions in Germany should come together to create like a plan, an electoral plan that also brings in hopefully the climate activists and climate movements to pressure, to either win a platform that a party that, or a coalition of parties that say, okay, we're going to commit to this, but pressure from below, obviously, to get this done, which is like eliminating this debt break, and then investing in technologies and investing in infrastructure very heavily. And also what the unions call for is this industrial price for energy, because obviously heavy industries need different prices in their energy bills than households, right? Because they need a lot of energy. So what the unions are saying is like, we need these prices to go down, so it's not, so the costs don't go up, and then the industries decide to go somewhere where it's cheaper. And this would also help in like transitioning to green energy, renewables, or all non-fossil fuel energy, so to speak. And so I think that would be like the most important points. But I think it should be a dialogue between unions and climate movement being there supporting that, more than like, maybe dictating what it should be. It should be like a push from different sides into like a project that will make, at the end, the state stronger, and investments also stronger in the country.
Well, yeah, and then I think on that, just in closing, because it is something that is becoming, as people are realizing how dire the situation is, people get very passionate, and understandably and rightfully so. But just in closing, I was wanting to hear what you would say to somebody who might say, oh, well, these workers, are in many ways people who have caused significant harm to the planet. They are part of the problem. They can't be a part of the solution, and that the climate movement would be better off just sort of, not even entertaining, trying to engage in any of that kind of dialogue. What would you say to somebody who is making that kind of argument to you?
Yeah, we have a guy here in Germany who is a climate activist, who used to be, I don't know if he still is, in the left party here in Germany, who has that exactly that arguments. I get very angry every time I read him, because he's like very anti-union and very anti-workers, with this moral stance of like, they are destroying the planet, and the people in the global south have to deal with the consequences. First of all, he obviously takes the blame into the wrong people, because it's not, workers don't have any say on things beyond, at least in Germany, beyond the workplace, right? They don't have any say in how.
Hell, most of them don't even get to directly control their own working conditions, let alone corporate policy.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to own our means of production, then okay, you can complain, but we can't. So that in itself doesn't make sense. And also, as I said, like, I don't think any kind of moral finger pointing is gonna make anyone change their mind or be on your side. And if we really want to push for things that are not liberal solutions to climate change, like real, for example, even thinking about nationalizing some sectors in society, like energy production, for example, we would need, we need a mass support for that, and we need the unions. And in Germany, unions are still strong in industry. So even if they weren't, I would still say they're important because they're representing workers. But in Germany, in industries, they are very strong, and they have a say, and they have also political influence. So it's like, and even and they have actually also very cool people who are thinking about this stuff, right? I think sometimes the climate movement, like, kind of is like a little bit monopolizing the topic when it's actually also discussed within unions. It's not something that's been ignored. Yeah, that I think would be.
No, that's very well said. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us on Left Reckoning. We'll have links below for people to follow your work. Really do appreciate it, and hope to talk again soon.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, there you have it, folks. It was really nice having Nicole on the program. Apologies for some of the audio issues there. It will be uploaded later, correct, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all those other great places. Folks, we're going to be going over to the post game. Just a quick programming note. As I said at the beginning of the stream, Matt and I are going to roll on a little bit of a Christmas break, so no Sunday show this week. But we will be back next Tuesday with the Left Reckoning Christmas New Year's Roundup, where we will be announcing the Bum Steer of the Year, worst characters from 2023. You're not going to want to miss it. We take a little bit of an interesting lens with who we end up deciding to put in there, and spend some time talking about their many defenders. But folks, the fun is not over tonight. We're going to be jumping over into the post game, where Matt and I, using new technologies, are going to be able to communicate and do a little post game, even though he wasn't here for the main show. Hope y'all join us. We're going to be hanging out there. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Give me about 10 minutes. So let's say 7:15 Central. We'll be up and ready to go. Everybody, I hope if you're not coming over to visit us, but you should be, Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I hope that you do have a Merry Christmas, a wonderful weekend, and a Happy New Year. Come see us next week. Thank you so much, and see you soon.